The morning sun painted the quiet streets of Millbrook in soft golden light. William Hayes walked slowly down Pine Street, his leather shoes clicking gently against the sidewalk. At 72 years old, he moved with careful purpose, his back straight despite the years. He wore his usual Tuesday outfit, a pressed white shirt, dark blue tie, and his favorite gray jacket that his late wife Martha had bought him 10 years ago. William looked forward to Tuesdays. It was coffee day at Morning Brew, the small shop on the corner of Pine and Main Street. For the past 2 years, since he retired, this had become his favorite routine. He would order his black coffee, buy the local newspaper, and sit by the window to read. The shop owner, Lisa Martinez, always saved his favorite table for him. As William approached the coffee shop, he noticed 3 teenage boys standing near the entrance. They were supposed to be in school, but instead they leaned against the brick wall, laughing loudly and pushing each other. William recognized the type restless young men with too much time and too little direction. The tallest boy was Tyler. He had messy brown hair and wore ripped jeans with a black t-shirt. His friends called him the leader, and he liked that. Next to him stood Brandon, a skinny boy with red hair and freckles. He always tried to impress Tyler by being the loudest and meanest. The third boy, Jake, was shorter than the others. He had dark hair and seemed less sure of himself. He followed the other 2, but often looked uncomfortable when they got too wild. William walked toward the door, expecting the boys to move aside. But Tyler stepped directly into his path. The teenager looked down at the older man with a smirk on his face. "Well, well," Tyler said loudly, "look what we have here." William stopped walking. He looked up at the boy with calm eyes. "Excuse me, young man. I would like to go inside." Brandon laughed and moved to stand next to Tyler. "Oh, he wants to go inside," he said in a mocking voice. "Did you hear that, Tyler? The old man wants to go inside." Jake shifted nervously, but said nothing. He looked around to see if any adults were watching. "I don't think this is your kind of place," Tyler continued. He crossed his arms over his chest. "This is a nice neighborhood. We don't need your type coming around here and causing trouble." William felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He had faced this kind of hatred before, many times throughout his life. But it still hurt. It still made him angry, even though he never let that anger show on his face. "I am not causing any trouble," William said quietly. "I just want to buy my coffee and read my newspaper." "Your coffee?" Brandon laughed again. "Who said this was your coffee shop? Maybe you should find somewhere else to drink your coffee. Somewhere more suited to people like you." The words hung in the air like poison. William knew exactly what Brandon meant by people like you. He had heard those words before, decades ago, when he was a young lawyer fighting for civil rights. He had heard them when he became a judge. He had heard them throughout his 40 years on the federal bench, usually whispered behind closed doors by people who thought he did not belong in such an important position. "Yeah," Tyler added, stepping closer to William. "Why don't you go back where you came from? This neighborhood was just fine before people like you started moving in." Inside the coffee shop, Lisa Martinez looked up from the espresso machine she was cleaning. She could see the confrontation through the large front window. Her stomach dropped as she realized what was happening. She knew William Hayes well. He was one of her kindest customers, always polite, always patient, and always left a generous tip. She had no idea about his background as a federal judge, but she knew he was a good man who deserved respect. Lisa wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the window to get a better look. She could see the 3 boys surrounding the elderly man, and she could tell by their body language that this was not a friendly conversation. William stood perfectly still. He did not step backward. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at each boy with the same calm expression he had worn in countless courtrooms, when facing hostile lawyers or angry defendants. I have been coming to this coffee shop every Tuesday for 2 years, William said. Lisa saves my table for me. I read my newspaper and mind my own business. I do not bother anyone. Well, maybe it's time to find a new coffee shop, Tyler said. He pushed William lightly on the shoulder. It was not hard enough to knock him down, but it was clear what he meant. We don't want old troublemakers like you hanging around here. Jake finally spoke up, but his voice was quiet and uncertain. Maybe we should just let him go inside, he said to his friends. Tyler turned on Jake with anger. Are you kidding me? Whose side are you on? Brandon pulled out his phone and started recording. This is going to be so funny, he said. Wait until everyone at school sees this old man getting put in his place. William watched the red recording light on the phone. He thought about all the young people he had tried to help throughout his career. He thought about the civil rights cases he had overseen, the fair sentences he had given, the mercy he had shown to young people who had made mistakes. He wondered what had gone wrong with these 3 boys. He wondered where their parents were, where their teachers were, where the adults in their lives had failed them. The confrontation continued as other customers inside the coffee shop began to notice what was happening outside their favorite morning spot. Brandon held his phone higher, making sure to get a good view of William's face. This is going to get so many likes, he said with a mean smile. Look at this old guy just standing there. He doesn't even fight back. Tyler laughed and pushed. William again, this time a little harder. Come on, old man. Say something. Get angry. Give us a good show for the camera. William took a small step back to keep his balance, but his face remained calm. His hands stayed at his sides. He had learned long ago that responding to hate with hate only made things worse. He had seen too many courtrooms where anger destroyed lives and families. Please, William said softly. I do not want any trouble. I just want to buy my coffee. Too bad, Brandon said, moving the phone closer to William's face. You picked the wrong neighborhood to cause problems in. Inside the coffee shop, Helen Roberts put down her morning tea and stood up quickly. Helen was 68 years old and had been a school teacher for 35 years before she retired. She had taught hundreds of teenagers, and she knew trouble when she saw it. She also knew that good people should not stand by and watch when someone needed help. Helen walked to the front door and pushed it open. The little bell above the door made a cheerful sound that seemed out of place in the tense situation. What is going on out here? Helen asked in her firm teacher voice. She looked directly at Tyler, who was still standing too close to William. Tyler turned to face her with the same smirk he had shown William. Nothing that concerns you, lady. Just having a little fun with our new neighbor here. Helen stepped closer to the group. She was not a tall woman, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent decades dealing with difficult teenagers. This does not look like fun to me. It looks like 3 young men bullying an elderly gentleman. Bullying? Brandon laughed, but his voice cracked a little. We're not bullying anyone. We're just talking. With a camera? Helen pointed to the phone in Brandon's hand. You are recording this man without his permission. That is not talking. That is harassment. Jake looked around nervously. He could see other people inside the coffee shop, watching through the windows. An older man with gray hair and work clothes was standing up from his table. A young woman with a baby was reaching for her phone, probably to call for help. Maybe we should go, Jake whispered to Tyler. Tyler heard him and got angry. We're not going anywhere. This is our neighborhood. We have every right to be here. Yes, you have the right to be here, Helen said. But you do not have the right to block this man from entering a public business. You do not have the right to push him or threaten him. Carlos Rivera had been drinking his coffee and reading the sports page when he noticed the commotion outside. Carlos was a mechanic who owned a small auto repair shop 3 blocks away. He came to Morning Brew every Tuesday after his early morning shift. He was a big man with strong hands and a kind heart. Carlos put down his newspaper and walked outside to join Helen. He stood next to William, not saying anything at first, just letting his presence be known. Carlos had grown up in Millbrook, and he knew that sometimes the best way to handle bullies was to show them they were outnumbered. "Is there a problem here?" Carlos asked. His voice was calm but firm. Tyler looked up at Carlos, who was much bigger than he was. For the first time, Tyler seemed less confident. "No problem. We were just talking to this guy." "It does not look like talking to me," Carlos said. "It looks like you are trying to keep him from going into the coffee shop." Brandon was still holding his phone, but he had stopped recording. The situation was not as funny anymore, with 2 adults standing up for the old man. "We're not doing anything wrong," he said, but his voice was not as loud as before. "Then why?" "Are you blocking the door?" Helen asked. "Why are you recording him? Why did you push him?" William watched the adults who had come to help him. He felt grateful, but also sad. He was sad that in 2025, he still needed protection from the same kind of hatred he had faced as a young man in the 1960s. He was sad that these teenagers had learned to hate people they did not even know. Lisa Martinez had been watching from inside the shop, and she finally decided to act. She walked to the door and opened it wide. "Mr. Hayes," she called out, "your table is ready. Your usual black coffee?" William nodded. To her, "Yes, thank you, Lisa. I will be right there." Tyler looked confused. "Mr. Hayes? You know this guy?" Lisa stepped outside and stood with the other adults. "Of course I know him. He comes here every Tuesday. He is one of my best customers. He is always polite and kind. But he's—" Tyler started to say something, then stopped. He looked around at the adults surrounding him and his friends. For the first time, he seemed to understand that maybe he was the one who did not belong in this situation. "He is what?" Helen asked sharply. "He is what, young man?" Tyler did not answer. He looked at Brandon, who was now holding his phone at his side. He looked at Jake, who was staring at the ground. "I think you boys need to move along," Carlos said. "Let this gentleman buy his coffee in peace." Brandon put his phone in his pocket. Whatever. This is boring anyway. But as the 3 teenagers started to back away from the door, they heard the sound of a car door slamming. Everyone turned to see a police car parked at the curb. A young officer in uniform was walking toward them. The officer looked at the group of people gathered outside the coffee shop. He saw the 3 teenagers, the 2 adults standing protectively near an elderly black man, and Lisa Martinez in her apron by the door. "Is everything okay here?" The officer asked. Tyler, Brandon, and Jake froze. They had not expected the police to show up. Jake's face went pale. Brandon shoved his hands deeper into his pockets. Tyler tried to look casual, but his heart was beating fast. The officer walked closer to the group, and as he got near, his expression changed completely. He stopped walking and stared at William with wide eyes. "Judge Hayes?" the officer said in a voice full of surprise and respect. The police officer stood still for a moment, staring at William with complete shock. His name was Danny Kim, and he was 28 years old. He had been a police officer in Millbrook for only 3 years, but he knew exactly who he was looking at. "Judge Hayes," Danny said again, this time louder. He quickly removed his police hat and held it respectfully in his hands. "Sir, I cannot believe it is really you." Tyler, Brandon, and Jake looked at each other with confusion. They had never seen a police officer act this way around anyone, especially not around an old black man they had been harassing. "Judge?" Tyler whispered to Brandon. "What is he talking about?" William smiled gently at the young officer. "Hello, Danny. How is your father doing? Is his back feeling better?" Danny's face lit up with surprise and happiness. "You remember my father?" "That was 8 years ago." "Of course I remember," William said. "Kim versus the insurance company. Your father hurt his back at work, and his employer tried to deny his benefits. It was a simple case, but important to your family." "Yes, sir," Danny said, his voice full of respect. "You ruled in his favor. You saved our family from losing our house. My father still talks about how fair you were, how you listened to both sides carefully." Helen Roberts gasped. She put her hand over her mouth and stared at William with wide eyes. "Judge Hayes," she repeated slowly. "You are Judge William Hayes. I read about you in the newspaper when you retired." Carlos Rivera stepped closer to William. His face showed recognition and respect. "Judge Hayes," he said quietly, "you helped my family too. My immigration case, about 10 years ago. You made sure I could stay in this country with my wife and children." The 3 teenagers stood frozen. They could not understand what was happening. How could this old man they had been bullying be someone so important that a police officer took off his hat and spoke to him like he was meeting a famous person? "I do not understand," Jake said in a small voice. "Who is he?" Danny Kim turned to face the 3 boys. His expression was serious now, and his voice carried the full authority of his badge. "This is Judge William Hayes. He served as a federal judge for 40 years. He is one of the most respected judges in the entire state." Tyler felt like the ground was moving under his feet. "A judge? A real judge?" "Not just any judge," Helen said, her teacher voice full of education and respect. "Judge Hayes handled some of the most important civil rights cases in our region. He fought for fairness and justice for everyone, regardless of their race or background." Brandon's face turned red. He remembered the video he had taken, the cruel words he had said, the way he had laughed at this man. "We did not know," he whispered. "That does not matter," Danny said firmly. "It does not matter if he was a judge or a janitor or anything else. You do not treat people the way I saw you treating him." More people were coming out of the coffee shop now. Word was spreading quickly among the customers that the elderly man being harassed was actually Judge Hayes. A woman named Maria Santos approached the group. She was a nurse at the local hospital and had been having her morning coffee before. "Her shift, Judge Hayes," Maria said with emotion in her voice. "You probably do not remember me, but you helped my family 15 years ago. My son was arrested for something he did not do. You made sure he got a fair trial. You saved his future." An older man named Paul Johnson walked over from his car. He had been driving by and stopped when he saw the police car and the crowd. "Is that really Judge Hayes?" he asked Maria. "Yes," she answered. The boys were bothering him, but they did not know who he was. Paul Johnson was a veteran who had served in the Army for 20 years. His face showed anger when he heard what had happened. "Judge Hayes handled veterans' rights cases for years," he told the group. "He made sure soldiers got the benefits they earned. He helped thousands of military families." Tyler looked around at all the adults. Every single person seemed to know something good about this man he had been bullying. Every person had a story about how Judge Hayes had helped them or their families or their community. "I want to go home," Jake said quietly to his friends, but Danny Kim was not finished. "Before anyone goes anywhere, I want to understand what happened here. Lisa, you called the police. What did you see?" Lisa Martinez stepped forward. She was still wearing her coffee shop apron, and her hands were shaking a little. "I saw these 3 boys blocking Mr. Hayes from entering my shop. They were saying terrible things to him. They pushed him. One of them was recording it with his phone." Danny looked at Brandon. "Is that true?" Do you have a recording of this incident? Brandon nodded miserably. He pulled out his phone, but his hands were shaking so much he could barely hold it. I deleted it, he said quietly. That is good, William said, speaking for the first time since Danny had arrived. I am glad you deleted it. Everyone turned to look at William. Tyler expected him to be angry, to demand that they be arrested, to want revenge for how they had treated him. But William's face showed no anger at all. Instead, he looked sad and tired. Judge Hayes, Danny said, do you want to press charges against these boys? What they did was clearly harassment and assault. William was quiet for a long moment. He looked at each of the three teenagers. Tyler was trying to look tough, but his eyes showed fear. Brandon was staring at the ground, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Jake had tears in his eyes. No, William said finally. I do not want to press charges. Danny looked surprised. Sir, they assaulted you. They used racial slurs. They recorded you without permission. They tried to prevent you from entering a public business. I know what they did, William said gently. But I also know they are young. They made a terrible mistake, but I believe people can learn from their mistakes. Helen Roberts shook her head in amazement. Even after everything they did to you, you want to show them mercy. That is what judges do, William said with a small smile. We try to find justice, but we also try to find hope. The three teenagers stood in complete silence, finally understanding the full weight of what they had done and who they had done it to. Tyler stared at Judge Hayes with his mouth open. He could not believe what he was hearing. This man, who he had pushed and insulted, was offering him mercy instead of punishment. Tyler had never met anyone like this before. You really do not want us arrested? Tyler asked in a shaky voice. No, William said calmly. But I do want you to understand what happened here today. Danny Kim put his police hat back on his head. Judge Hayes, I have to tell you about this man's career, he said to the three boys. Maybe then you will understand how wrong you were. Danny turned to face Tyler, Brandon, and Jake directly. Judge Hayes was appointed to the federal court when he was 32 years old. That was 40 years ago. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how smart and good a person has to be to become a federal judge so young? The boys shook their heads. They had never thought about judges as real people before. They had never wondered how someone became a judge or what judges did all day. He handled thousands of cases, Danny continued. Civil rights cases, criminal cases, business disputes, immigration cases. He was known for being fair to everyone who came into his courtroom. Helen Roberts stepped closer to the boys. Her teacher instincts were taking over. Judge Hayes graduated from law school at the top of his class. He worked as a lawyer helping poor people who could not afford to pay for legal help. Then he became a prosecutor, making sure criminals went to jail. Then he became a judge. Carlos Rivera nodded. My case was not the only immigration case he handled. He helped hundreds of families stay together. He helped people become American citizens. He gave people second chances. Tyler felt sick to his stomach. We called him. Tyler could not finish the sentence. He could not repeat the terrible words he had said. We know what you called him, Paul Johnson said angrily. We heard the racist things you said. We saw you push him. Jake started crying. The tears ran down his face, and he did not try to stop them. I am so sorry, he said to William. I am so sorry. We did not know who you were. William looked at Jake with kind eyes. Would it have been okay to treat me that way if I was not a judge? What if I was just a regular old man trying to buy coffee? Jake cried harder. He realized the truth of what Judge Hayes was saying. It did not matter who the man was. What they had done was wrong, no matter what Brandon finally looked. Up from the ground, No, he said quietly. It would not have been okay no matter who you were. We were wrong. More people had gathered around them. Word was spreading through the small town that something important was happening outside. Morning brew. A woman named Nancy Phillips had heard about the situation from her neighbor and came to see what was going on. Judge Hayes, Nancy said with excitement in her voice. I cannot believe it is you. You married my daughter and her husband 5 years ago when they could not afford a big wedding. You did the ceremony for free in your office. A man named Robert Chun joined the group. Judge Hayes, you helped my family when my father was cheated by his business partner. You made sure he got his money back. Each new story made Tyler, Brandon, and Jake feel worse. They began to understand that they had not just insulted a random old man. They had insulted someone who had spent his entire life helping people, protecting people, and making their community better. I do not understand, Tyler said, his voice breaking. Why are you being nice to us? Why do you not want us to go to jail? William was quiet for a moment. He looked at all the people who had gathered around them. He saw faces full of respect and love for him, and faces full of anger toward the boys. He knew this was an important moment, not just for the 3 teenagers, but for everyone watching. When I was about your age, William said slowly, I made mistakes too. I was angry about things I could not control. I said things I should not have said. I hurt people's feelings. Tyler looked surprised. You did? Yes, William said. I grew up during a time when black people were treated very badly in this country. I was angry about that. Sometimes I took that anger out on people who did not deserve it. Brandon wiped his nose with his sleeve. What happened to you? How did you change? I had good teachers, William said, looking at Helen with a smile. I had people who believed in me, even when I did not believe in myself. I had mentors who showed me a better way to live. Helen Roberts felt tears in her own eyes. She understood what Judge Hayes was trying to do. He was trying to teach these boys the same lesson someone had taught him long ago. Most importantly, William continued, I learned that hate only creates more hate. The people who treated me badly because of my skin color were wrong. But if I treated other people badly because I was angry, then I would be wrong too. Carlos Rivera nodded. Judge Hayes, you always said in your courtroom that justice was not about revenge. Justice was about making things right. That is correct, William said. So the question now is, how do we make this right? How do we turn this bad situation into something good? Tyler looked at his friends, then back at Judge Hayes. What can we do? How can we fix what we did? That is a very good question, William said. What do you think you should do? Jake wiped his eyes and thought hard. We should learn about you. We should learn about what you did for people. We should learn about why what we did was so wrong, Brandon added. Tyler was quiet for a long time. Then he said, we should tell other people not to do what we did. We should make sure this never happens to anyone else. William smiled for the first time since the whole incident began. Those are very good ideas. I think we can work with those ideas. Danny Kim looked impressed. Judge Hayes, you are still teaching people, even in retirement. A teacher never really stops teaching, Helen said with pride in her voice. The crowd of people around them began to understand that they were watching something special happen. They were seeing hate turn into hope, anger turn into learning, and punishment turn into growth. Judge Hayes looked at the 3 boys standing in front of him. Tyler was trying to be brave, but his hands were shaking. Brandon kept looking at the ground, ashamed of what he had done. Jake was still crying, but he was listening carefully to every word. I want to make you a promise, William said to them. If you are willing to learn from this mistake, I am willing to help you become better people. Tyler looked up with surprise. You would help us? After what we did to you? That is exactly why I want to help you, William said. The best way to fight hate is with education and kindness. Danny Kim stepped forward. What did you have in mind, Judge Hayes? William thought for a moment. I want these young men to spend time learning about their community. I want them to understand the history of the people who live here. I want them to see that everyone has value, regardless of what they look like. Helen Roberts clapped her hands together. That is a wonderful idea. I volunteer at the library every Wednesday. I could help them with research. Research about what? Brandon asked nervously. About the history of Millbrook, Helen said. About the different families who have lived here over the years. About the contributions that people from all backgrounds have made to our town. Carlos Rivera nodded. My grandfather helped build the bridge over Miller Creek in 1953. Most people do not know that it was built by Mexican and Italian workers who came here looking for jobs. My family came here from Korea in 1987, Danny Kim added. My father worked 3 jobs to save money to bring the rest of our family to America. Judge Hayes helped us when the insurance company tried to cheat us. Maria Santos smiled. My grandmother was the first Latina nurse at Millbrook Hospital. She had to fight for the right to work there, but she never gave up. Tyler was starting to understand. You want us to learn about all the different people who made this town what it is today. Exactly, William said. And I want you to think about what you learned while you were researching. I want you to come back and tell me what you discovered. When? Jake asked. 1 month from today, William said. We will meet right here, at Morning Brew. You can tell me what you learned, and we can talk about what it means. Lisa Martinez, who had been listening to the whole conversation, stepped forward. Judge Hayes, I would be honored to provide coffee and snacks for that meeting. That is very kind of you, Lisa, William said. But these young men should pay for their own coffee. It will be part of their learning experience. The boys looked at each other. They realized that Judge Hayes was giving them a chance to prove they could change, but they would have to work for it. What if we do not do a good job? Brandon asked. What if we do not learn enough? Then we will meet again the next month. William said simply. And the month after that, if necessary. I am not going anywhere. Paul Johnson, the veteran, stepped closer to the boys. You are getting a gift that most people never get. You are getting a second chance from someone you wronged. Do not waste it. We will not, Tyler said. And for the first time that day, he sounded like he meant what he was saying. Danny Kim looked at his watch. I need to get back to work, but I want to say something first. He turned to Judge Hayes. Sir, what you are doing here today is exactly why people respect you so much. You could have had these boys arrested. You could have made them pay for what they did. Instead, you are giving them a chance to grow. That is what the law should do, William said. Punishment without learning is just revenge. But learning without consequences is not justice either. These young men will work hard over the next month, and that work will be their consequence. Helen Roberts was already making plans in her head. Boys, I want you to meet me at the library this Saturday, at 10 in the morning. We will start your education then. What should we bring? Jake asked. Just yourselves and an open mind, Helen said. And maybe a notebook to write down what you learn. The crowd of people who had gathered began to break up. Everyone was talking about what they had just seen. Some were amazed by Judge Hayes' kindness. Others were hopeful that the 3 boys would really change. Carlos Rivera shook hands with William before he left. Judge, you just taught those boys something more valuable than any punishment could have. I hope so, William said. They are still young. They can still choose who they want to become. As the crowd scattered, Tyler, Brandon, and Jake stood together, not sure what to do next. "I guess we should go," Tyler said. "Wait," William called to them. "I want to tell you one more thing." The boys turned back to face him. "What you did today was wrong," William said. "But it does not have to define who you are for the rest of your lives. You get to choose what kind of men you become. Choose wisely." Jake nodded. "Thank you, Judge Hayes. Thank you for giving us another chance." "Thank each other," William said. "You will need to support each other through this process. Change is hard work, but it is easier when you do not do it alone." The three always walked away together, talking quietly among themselves. For the first time, they were not planning trouble or looking for someone to bother. They were thinking about the work they had to do and the people they wanted to become. 1 month later, Tyler, Brandon, and Jake sat in morning brew with Judge Hayes. They had spent 4 weeks learning about their community, and they had discovered things that amazed them. They learned about the Underground Railroad station that had operated in Millbrook before the Civil War. They learned about the Japanese family who had been forced to leave during World War II, but came back to start the town's first flower shop. They learned about the Polish workers who had built the railroad, the Irish families who had started the first schools, and the African American soldiers who had returned from Vietnam to help build the new library. But most importantly, they had learned about themselves. They had learned that fear and ignorance had made them cruel, and that knowledge and understanding could make them kind. Judge Hayes listened to their presentations with pride. These were not the same boys who had blocked his path a month earlier. These were young men who were beginning to understand their place in a larger community. "What will you do now?" William asked them. Tyler answered first. "We want to start a club at school. We want to teach other students about the history of our town and why it is important to respect everyone." Brandon nodded. "We want to make sure that what we did to you never happens to anyone else." Jake added, "We want to volunteer at the library to help other students with their research." William smiled. "Those are excellent plans. I am proud of all 3 of you." As they finished their coffee and prepared to leave, Helen Roberts joined them at the table. "Judge Hayes," she said, "I have been thinking about what happened here. You turned a moment of hate into a lesson of hope. You reminded all of us why we admire you so much." "I just did what any teacher would do," William said. "I saw students who needed to learn, and I helped them learn." Tyler, Brandon, and Jake became known throughout Millbrook High School as the boys who had changed. They told their story to anyone who would listen, not because they were proud of what they had done, but because they wanted to help others avoid making the same mistakes. Judge Hayes continued his Tuesday morning routine at Morning Brew, but now he was often joined by other members of the community who had been inspired by his grace and wisdom. The coffee shop became a place where people from different backgrounds came together to talk and learn from each other. And every month, on the anniversary of that difficult morning, Tyler, Brandon, and Jake met with Judge Hayes to share what new things they had learned about their community and about themselves. The tradition continued for years, long after the boys had grown into men with families of their own. The story of what happened outside Morning Brew became a legend in Millbrook, passed down from parents to children as an example of how one person's dignity and wisdom could change hearts and minds. It reminded everyone that the best response to hatred is not more hatred, but education, understanding, and the patient work of building a better community for all.